Here's something very interesting for us humans and our history. What if I told you that before the year 1500, most people had no idea what they actually looked like? Not vaguely, not sort of, precisely. No sharp reflection, no detailed image, no Snapchat. No way to study your own face the way you can right now by opening your phone's camera. For thousands of years, your face was something other people saw, not something you examined. Your identity lived in their reactions, in their smiles, their fear, their affection. You existed to yourself as a rumor, a blurred shimmer in dark water, a warped distortion in polished bronze, a flickering shadow by candlelight. And then, in Renaissance Europe, humanity invented something that changed consciousness itself. The mirror. Not just any mirror, a perfect one. Clear, sharp, unforgiving. And the moment people saw themselves clearly for the first time, everything shifted. Because the mirror didn't just reflect faces, it created the modern self. This is the story of how a sheet of silvered glass fractured human identity and why we've been obsessed with our own image ever since. Mirrors are ancient. Polished obsidian mirrors existed in Anatolia as early as 6000 BCE. Ancient Egyptians polished copper. Greeks and Romans used bronze. In China, artisans crafted metal mirrors with remarkable skill. But here's the thing. None of these produced an accurate image. Metal mirrors distort, they darken, they ripple with every imperfection, they tarnish over time. You could recognize yourself in one, but you couldn't scrutinize yourself. And that difference? Enormous. Because identity in the ancient and medieval world wasn't primarily visual, it was relational. You were known by your role: blacksmith, farmer, mother, priest. You were embedded in family, village, guild, church. The self was defined by belonging, not by appearance. Medieval art reflects this perfectly. Portraiture was symbolic, not realistic. Faces were stylized. Individual likeness mattered less than spiritual meaning. The soul mattered more than symmetry. But something was quietly developing in Europe that would shatter this entire worldview.
In 13th century Venice, glassmakers on the island of Murano began refining a technique that would alter human consciousness. By the early 1500s, Venetian artisans perfected the process of coating glass with a reflective amalgam, initially tin and mercury, creating mirrors of unprecedented clarity. For the first time in history, humans could see themselves sharply, not as myth, not as symbol, as image. And that image did something radical. It made the self visible, not just to others, to yourself. Psychologists today talk about something called the mirror stage, a term introduced by French psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan. It describes a moment in early childhood when a baby first recognizes their reflection as themselves. It's a pivotal psychological event. The child realizes that image is me, but it's also destabilizing because the reflection appears unified and whole, while internally the child feels fragmented, emotional, chaotic. The reflection becomes an ideal, a version to measure against. Now, imagine that moment happening not in infancy, but at a civilizational scale. When Renaissance Europe gained access to high-quality mirrors, society collectively entered a new mirror stage. People could examine their faces repeatedly. They could compare yesterday to today. They could adjust, and artists followed immediately. The Renaissance explosion of realistic portraiture, Jan van Eyck, Leonardo da Vinci, Albrecht Dürer, coincided directly with improved mirror technology. Dürer painted self-portraits that are almost confrontational in their detail. His 1500 self-portrait depicts him gazing outward with Christ-like symmetry and precision. That kind of visual self-awareness was unprecedented. The mirror didn't just reflect the face, it encouraged the performance of it. For the first time, artists could study their own expressions in real time. They could rehearse gestures, adjust angles, perfect symmetry. Art became a conversation between the artist and their reflection, and that conversation fundamentally changed how humans thought about identity.
Here's the shift most people miss. Before high-quality mirrors, identity was negotiated publicly. After mirrors, identity became curated privately. For the first time, you could retreat to a room and examine yourself alone. You could rehearse expressions. You could study imperfections. You could adjust clothing not for warmth or function, but for presentation. Historians note that during the 16th and 17th centuries, personal grooming practices exploded among European elites. Cosmetics, elaborate hairstyles, tailored clothing, decorative accessories. This wasn't random fashion evolution. It paralleled the rise of the reflective self. The mirror relocated identity from the public square to the private bedroom. Self-consciousness intensified. Instead of asking, "Who am I in relation to my community?" people increasingly asked, "How do I appear?" The philosopher Charles Taylor argues that modern identity involves a turn inward, a focus on internal depth and personal authenticity. The mirror may not be the sole cause of that shift, but it amplified it. Because once you can see yourself clearly, you can detach from how others describe you. You can form a self-image independent of the crowd. That's powerful and isolating. The medieval worldview emphasized spiritual introspection. The Renaissance didn't abandon spirituality, but it elevated human form and individual expression. Humanism placed new emphasis on the dignity and uniqueness of the individual. Accurate mirrors reinforced that shift. When you see your own face clearly, it becomes difficult to treat it as secondary. Surface begins to matter. Theologians warned about vanity, and with good reason. By the 17th century, moralists were already criticizing excessive mirror gazing as narcissistic. The very word narcissism comes from the Greek myth of Narcissus, who fell in love with his own reflection in water. But water distorts, glass perfects. The Renaissance mirror transformed metaphor into daily reality. For the first time, large numbers of people could become intimate with their own image. And image invites comparison. Comparison invites hierarchy. Hierarchy invites anxiety.
Consider how mirrors altered physical spaces. Before their widespread availability, homes didn't center around reflective surfaces. By the 17th and 18th centuries, mirrors became status symbols in aristocratic households. The Hall of Mirrors at Versailles, completed in 1684, is not subtle. It's an architectural celebration of reflection. Power reflecting power, identity multiplied infinitely. This wasn't decoration, it was philosophy in glass. The self was now something to display, refine, and evaluate. And over time, this practice trickled downward socially. By the 19th century, industrialization made mirrors more affordable. The silvered glass process was improved by German chemist Justus von Liebig in 1835, who developed a method of depositing metallic silver onto glass more safely and cheaply. Mirrors moved from palaces into middle-class homes and eventually into every bathroom. By the 20th century, the reflective self was constant, not occasional, not rare, constant. You wake up and see your face. You pass shop windows and see your body. You enter elevators lined with mirrors. The self becomes a permanent visual project. Here's the deeper psychological shift. Before accurate mirrors, identity was narrated.
After mirrors, identity was visualized. Narrated identity depends on stories told within community. Visual identity depends on image maintenance. An image can fracture. Modern psychology links heightened self-objectification with increased anxiety, especially in societies saturated with visual feedback. When you repeatedly evaluate yourself as an object to be seen, you begin to split into observer and observed. You watch yourself living. That division is subtle but profound. It can lead to increased self-awareness. It can also lead to chronic self-surveillance. The Renaissance didn't invent insecurity, but it intensified visual self-reference, and that changed the architecture of consciousness.
The mirror prepared humanity for something even more destabilizing: photography, then film, then social media. The leap from mirror to smartphone is not as dramatic as it seems. The Renaissance mirror said, "This is you." The camera said, "This is you permanently." Social media says, "This is you judged." The private ego that was born in the bedroom now performs on global stages. But the root mechanism remains visual self-recognition. The mirror didn't create ego. Humans have always had a sense of self, but it sharpened it, it externalized it, it gave it edges, and edges can cut. The mirror is silent. It doesn't argue, it doesn't command, it simply returns your gaze. But that return is powerful, because when you look into a clear mirror, you experience something rare in evolutionary history. You confront yourself as object. And in that confrontation, the communal self slowly yields to the private ego. Identity migrates inward. Belonging competes with presentation. Reflection becomes rehearsal, and humanity begins the long journey toward image-conscious modernity. Imagine again a world without mirrors. You would still have identity, but it would be carried in memory, voice, gesture, and story, not in glass. The invention of the mirror didn't just let us see ourselves, it taught us to evaluate ourselves. And once evaluation begins, comparison follows. From ripples in dark water to silvered glass to glowing screens, the line is unbroken. We didn't just invent better reflections, we built a civilization around them. And somewhere between the first polished bronze disc and the bathroom mirror you glanced at this morning, the human soul learned to look back at itself. If you enjoyed this journey back to when we first started truly seeing ourselves, drop a like and comment your thoughts. Thanks for watching, and remember, always stay infinite.